Good evening, hello and welcome. You're with the news today, your primetime destination. Newsmakers talking points. The big talking point, the Trump-Vance J.D. Good for India or not? What really are the big talking points as Vance meets Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi? Also, the executive versus judiciary debate. We'll be joined by a senior judge and one of the senior advocates as we look at an issue that's becoming increasingly troublesome. Let's first take a look at the 9 headlines at 9. US Vice President J.D. Vance meets Prime Minister Modi, the first one-on-one meeting on trade and other issues. Prime Minister hosts a dinner for the US Vice President visiting Delhi with his family. Rahul Gandhi in the United States says the Election Commission is compromised, something very wrong with the system. The BJP targets Rahul Gandhi, accuses him of defaming India on foreign soil. The next Chief Justice, Justice Gawai, observes in court that the Supreme Court is being accused of encroaching into executive. His comments come against the backdrop of remarks by Vice President Dhankar on judicial overreach. BJP MP Nishikant Dubey is at it again, now targets ex-CC Qureshi over Waqf Act criticism, says Qureshi was a Muslim commissioner. Qureshi hits back, says judge me by work, not religion. BJP distances itself from Dubey's remark. Wife of a former Karnataka top cop confesses to murder. Murder weapon recovered. India Today accesses wife's WhatsApp chat. She allegedly killed her husband. After speculation in Maharashtra over a tie-up between Uddhav Thackeray and Raj, Sharad Pawar and Ajit Pawar share a stage for third time in 2 weeks, sparking speculation of another family reunion on the cards. Flash floods leave a trail of destruction in Jammu and Kashmir's Ramban, cripple normal life, rescue operation still underway, connectivity hit by debris on highways. China warns against trade deals with the United States at its expense, vows countermeasures. China slams the tariff escalation, says US bargaining with a tiger for its skin. Pope Francis is dead a day after Easter at 88 years after a prolonged illness. Head of Worldwide Catholic Church no more, was seen as the pro-poor Pope. But the story that's happening at this moment, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US Vice President J.D. Vance have welcomed progress in trade talks. The two leaders have exchanged their views on regional and global issues. India and the US have called for dialogue and diplomacy as the way forward. Prime Minister Modi has said that he looks forward to a Trump visit later this year to India. This is the first formal visit between J.D. Vance and the Indian Prime Minister. Mr. Vance is on a 3-day personal visit to India, where he is also expected to be at a wedding in Jaipur. Let's first get the very latest from our Diplomatic Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan. Geeta, largely this visit presumably is ceremonial. Vance doesn't come with a large delegation to deal with specific issues. Is this simply about building chemistry between the Modi government and the new Trump-Vance administration in Washington as a build-up to what happened when the Prime Minister visited White House a few months ago?
Well, it certainly is, Rajdeep. This is the second highest level visit from the United States of America. But yes, it is not one where delegation level talks could lead to outcomes that could lead to announcements. That certainly will happen when the leadership meets again, which is Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. Meanwhile, both sides are working on a bilateral trade agreement, and that is the focus over here. For Vice President Vance, this is more of a private visit than an official one. But yes, the fact that the two sides reviewed progress. J.D. Vance did not come alone, Rajdeep. He's come with a delegation from Pentagon and State Department. because they did know that there is going to be a delegation level talk between the two sides. On the Indian side, we have National Security Advisor, our Indian ambassador to the United States of America, Vinay Quatra, Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri, External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, all of them were there. And so he came with officials too. To ensure that there is a proper conversation on specific areas when they're reviewing bilateral ties. What's important over here is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's message to Vice President J.D. Vance when he conveyed his greetings to President Donald Trump and said he looks forward to meeting the US President later this year. So,
Right.
in all probability, what we are expecting is Trump attending the Quad Summit that India is to host this year.
Okay, Geeta Mohan joining us with those details. Of course, as Geeta said, this is more of a personal visit that J.D. Vance is having. You can see him there. His children very much the attention of most Instagrammers, and to some extent in those photographs of Prime Minister Modi as well. Now, why is J.D. Vance important? In many ways, the Vice President of the United States is firmly number two. Donald Trump's presidency is such that he seems to overshadow all else. But J.D. Vance does matter. He is the one who often becomes the face of some of the tough decisions that the Donald Trump government is taking. He often talks tough to foreign governments, whether it's been in Europe or whether it's been to the Ukrainian President Zelensky. And that often has caused discomfort to counterparts. This visit to India is also important because it comes in the middle of trade talks that are at an advanced stage. The key question, of course, is, does India trust the Trump-Vance brand of diplomacy? Take a look.
In the 4 months in office, US Vice President J.D. Vance has practiced a new brand of aggressive diplomacy. The world saw it first when Vance attended the Munich Security Conference, where he minced no words.
Months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens.
Vance, as many would describe, lectured Europe on democracy and security.
Within their own homes. What has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important?
I think it's disrespectful for you.
Vance again hit headlines when he pulled up Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House in the presence of President Trump. The summit ended without any talks, and Zelensky was asked to leave the White House.
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President.
Vance's India tour, in comparison, is a low-key affair, with both countries already in an advanced stage of trade talks. The US Vice President is on a personal visit to India with minimum official engagement. He is accompanied by wife Usha Vance, sons Ivan and Vivek, and daughter Mirabel. The visit sets the stage for future talks, especially in the strategic sphere. Bureau Report, India Today.
So is the Trump-Vance Jodi good for India? Can India trust Trump and Vance to deliver? Is Trump's diplomacy driven, or the Trump-Vance brand of diplomacy driven by optics more than substance? Joined by two special guests, Vivek Kaju, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, and another senior diplomat, KC Singh, joining us. I appreciate both of you joining us. I wanted to get you to share your wisdom on how India should look at this entire Trump-Vance brand of diplomacy. Why don't you go first, Mr. Kaju? How do you see the manner in which Trump and Vance do their diplomacy? Is it much more about personal chemistry?
Look, there is no Jodi. There never has been a Jodi between a president and the vice president in the United States. The vice president does jobs that the president entrusts him or involves himself in areas that the president allows him. So let's be clear that it's a Trump administration. Vance does Trump's bidding. That has always been so in the United States. Second, Vance does Trump's, if I may use the word, occasionally his dirty work, in the sense that if there's an aggressive message, Trump leaves it to Vance to deliver it, and Vance does it with great happiness, because Vance appeals to the same constituency and wants to build the same constituency as Trump does. Now, third, as far as this visit is concerned, you have correctly characterized it as a personal visit. And normally when such personal visits take place, and I'm sure my senior colleague Casey will bear me out, you do have an add-on with a meeting between the Prime Minister and the visiting dignitary, if he is an important visiting dignitary, such as the Vice President of the United States necessarily is. There is the added element of the fact that there is his good lady who happens to be of Indian origin. So I found it curious when the official statement or official announcement of the Ministry of External Affairs said that this was an official visit. There was certain official ceremonial that was done, but it is not an official visit. You are absolutely right in saying it's a personal visit. My last point, I do not expect that this visit would in any way contribute to the tough negotiations that are going on between India and the United States on tariffs. If anything, Vance will deliver a message that India should abide by what the President of the United States wants.
Okay, let me bring in K.C. Singh and to take your last point forward that Mr. Kajju just made Mr. Singh, that America is going to be tough on trade negotiations. And the next 6 months of the Indo-US relationship will be determined by how successful those trade negotiations are. Forget all the optics. It's nice to pull the cheeks of the children of Mr. Vance. At the end of the day, your success or failure is not going to be judged by these optics, but by how successful you are in culminating a trade deal. Is that fair is that a fair statement to make?
That's absolutely correct. And it's not 6 months. Actually, it's 90 days, and I think about 15 days are already over. So you just have about a little over 2 months left, in which by then Trump will again revisit that, whether he wants to extend the duties further or he wants to then pick on some people. It is correct, as Mr. Kajju said, totally correct, that vice presidents generally are not given too much leeway. Sometimes they are. Bush Sr. was given a lot of leeway by Reagan, but mostly they are in the shadow of the president. And in case of Trump, that even more so. You were showing the footage of the meeting with Zelensky in White House.
Yes.
The distinct impression was that actually Vance jumped in and exacerbated it. It was almost
was that
as if
deliberate? You see, the belief is that that was also deliberate, that Vance was used to, in a way, corner Zelensky.
I don't know whether he was used or he wanted, at that stage, he had not got much attention. And he knew that this is the direction in which Trump is going. If you see, Trump is also a bit surprised. Otherwise, till then, Trump was talking in largely normal way for about 15 minutes with Zelensky, but this exacerbated it and started the whole thing. So he's very smart. He jumps in and he's trying to be useful to Trump. And we shouldn't assume that everything he does because Trump has asked him. Also, we will know what he says because, look, he's not spoken in Delhi. There's no public lecture in Delhi. The only public lecture he gives is in Jaipur at the International Center. We'll see what he says. That may have some official message which he conveys, which he might have conveyed personally to the Prime Minister when he was talking to them. But essentially, I think India is also using him as a messenger boy and sending good vibes, good optics back to Trump for whatever it is worth. But essentially, it's going to be a tough negotiation with all the 60-odd countries. And I think we are not going to be an exception. So let's see where that goes.
But do those optics, Vivek Kajju, make a difference? Do optics make a difference when you are in the midst of these tough trade negotiations? The fact that India is among the few countries with which the Trump-Vance leadership, at least at the moment, seems to have developed a decent chemistry. Does that make a difference?
In my experience, no. Interests do. Personal chemistry plays a very minor role, and certainly with Trump, it doesn't. You had Trump sitting with the Prime Minister when he said that India is a tariff king or words to that effect. And while the Prime Minister was there, he did not, in February in the United States, he did not hesitate in imposing his tariffs. So I think I have always had deep suspicion about the utility of this term personal chemistry. Yes, in certain cases, it smoothens the path. But when crucial interests are involved, its impact, quite frankly, is zilch, and we can see it from our own experience during the Modi term, first term and second term.
Yeah, in fact, one of those images, of course, was when Prime Minister Modi, for example, was with the Chinese president on a jhula or a swing in Ahmedabad, and then relations, unfortunately, went the wrong way a few years later. Though, KC Singh, therefore, should we tread very cautiously with this particular administration in Washington at the moment, not get carried away by any sweet talking that might happen behind closed doors?
Absolutely, because we don't even know what is Trump's endgame. There was a Japanese trade delegation which was in Washington. And after 3-4 days, they've come back because the interlocutors told them, we don't know what is the endgame. We don't know what to tell you and what to settle on. No, because the tariffs which have been imposed are very arbitrarily imposed. They have nothing to do with actual trade, complexities of trade and so on and so forth, and saying, okay, for instance, gems and jewelry are the largest component of our exports. But America doesn't export any large export of gems and jewelry. So how do you impose duties on that? But Trump doesn't understand that. Trump says it has to be a blanket thing, and therefore it is going to be very difficult to negotiate a trade deal, because trade deals are based on matching interests, balancing interests, seeing, okay, you accommodate me here, I'll accommodate you there. So far, Trump has not shown any propensity to go into details or to show this kind of flexibility, although his growing popularity at home, that may, and one good thing is, that is the only positive signal which has come out, that he has not sided with Israel to attack Iran, because there was a division amongst the advisors. For the first time, we saw that the advisors around Trump had two different approaches, and therefore he stepped back, which means as his popularity drops, he may be becoming more pragmatic, more willing to listen to people around them, and that's where probably J.D. Vance can play some role, but we don't know what his real thinking is.
Okay, let me leave it there. I appreciate both of you joining us and giving us a sense as senior diplomats of how one should tread with this Trump-Vance administration. Vivek Kajju, KC Singh, thank you very much for joining me here on the news today. I want to move on to our big story back home. It is now becoming every day some kind of a face-off between the highest judiciary and the executive of the country. Today, the next Chief Justice of India, Justice B.R. Gavai, in the court, reacted to the recent attacks on the judiciary by members of parliament and even the Vice President. Without naming them, he spoke of the allegations of judicial overreach. This comes amidst the political war that has broken out after a BJP MP, Nishikant Dubey, accused the apex court of inciting religious wars in the country. The BJP may have distanced itself from Dubey's statement, but the damage has been done. Many are demanding contempt proceedings against Dubey. Take a look at this special report, and then we'll come to our face-off.
The judiciary in the firing line. BJP MP Nishikant Dubey, in an unprecedented attack on the Supreme Court, held it responsible for communal tension.
कृष्ण जन्मभूमि का मामला आएगा, मथुरा में तो कहोगे कागज दिखाओ। आप जब शिव की बात होगी, ज्ञानवापी मस्जिद की बात आएगी, कागज दिखाओ। इस देश में धार्मिक युद्ध भड़काने के लिए केवल और केवल सुप्रीम कोर्ट जिम्मेवार है। सब कुछ के लिए सुप्रीम कोर्ट जाना है, तो इस संसद का कोई मतलब नहीं है, विधानसभा का कोई मतलब नहीं है, उसको बंद कर देना।
The MP even named the Chief Justice of India.
इस देश में जितने गृह युद्ध हो रहे हैं उसके जिम्मेवार केवल यहाँ के चीफ जस्टिस ऑफ इंडिया संजीव खन्ना साहब।
BJP President J.P. Nadda, in a post on X, distanced his party from the MP statement, but other party leaders came out in Dubey's support.
देखिए निशिकांत दुबे जी जो बोले हैं वो तो सही बात बोले हैं। पॉलिसी मेकर जो नियम बना रहे, रूल बना रहे, उसी नियम को आप खंडन कर देंगे तो ये कहाँ का नियम है? तो फिर पार्लियामेंट को बंद कर दीजिए।
The opposition accused the ruling party of targeting the judiciary.
इस प्रकार का यदि कोई बयान देते हैं तो भारतीय जनता पार्टी यदि ईमानदार है तो उसे तत्काल निलंबित कर देना चाहिए, बर्खास्त कर देना चाहिए। क्या ये कंटेम्प्ट नहीं बनता?
The BJP rejected the Congress charge and shared a video of Indira Gandhi reminding the grand old party of its past.
How does Mr. Shah know what is happening in the political world? What are the forces at work which want to destroy a developing economy? Is a judge competent to decide that? Then why have democracy? Why have elections?
Earlier, the Supreme Court had faced criticism by Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar over its verdict setting 3-month time frame for the President to decide on bills passed by the state assemblies.
There is a directive to the President by a recent judgment. Where are we heading? What is happening in the country?
The issue figured in the Supreme Court on Monday when lawyer Vishnu Shankar Jain mentioned his petition for using Article 355 in West Bengal. Justice B.R. Gavai reacted saying, "You want us to issue writ of mandamus to the President to impose this? As it is, we are facing allegations of encroaching into executive." Meanwhile, some lawyers have written to the Attorney General seeking permission to file contempt of court petitions against BJP MP Nishikant Dubey. Bureau Report, India Today.
My first guest is Mahesh Jethmalani, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court, someone who was closely associated with the BJP and has been a nominated MP in Parliament as well. Appreciate you joining us, Mr. Jethmalani. Where do you stand on the question that is now increasingly being raised that members of the BJP in some form or the other are making a concerted attempt to intimidate the judiciary as seen by the statements of their senior MP Nishikant Dubey, and that the government is even using constitutional authorities like Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar as part of this attempt to intimidate the higher judiciary when it is dealing with several important cases, and therefore this amounts to contempt of the judiciary?
You know, Rajdeep, first of all, I think anybody who, attempts to intimidate the judiciary is indulging in a completely misconceived exercise doomed for failure, because I don't think that the judiciary gets intimidated. I mean, there was a time perhaps when, things were much more autocratic in this country, and I'm talking particularly about the emergency period when judges were, there was those 2 years where, yes, judges were really intimidated. There was a fear psychosis created in the country. But I don't think either before that, I've been in practice now for well nigh 42 years. Even then before that, I used to accompany my father in many of his celebrated constitutional cases where he was fighting for freedom. And I never thought the judiciary was ever intimidated except for that brief period. So I think this is a misconceived notion, right? If anybody's tried to intimidate the judiciary, is not likely to succeed.
No, Mr. Jethmalani, the fact is that a BJP MP like Nishikant Dubey stirs a controversy, alleges that the Chief Justice of India, Sanjeev Khanna, is responsible for all civil wars in the country, then goes a step further, accuses the Supreme Court of inciting religious wars. Surely that when that is done, and when you have a BJP MP and a former Deputy Chief Minister of UP, Dinesh Sharma, also joining in, the BJP social media army joining in to criticize the Supreme Court, I mean, is this not an attempt in some way to put pressure on the Supreme Court to draw some kind of a line?
No, but why say intimidation? I mean, why do you attribute a motive to intimidate? Maybe a motive out of frustration. They may not be happy with, for instance, that Waqf board case, etc. And I'm not suggesting they were justified if that was indeed their motive, as opposed to intimidation. That it was a venting of frustration because of a temporary status quo order, etc.
Mr. Jethmalani, you are saying venting frustration? But that is a very dangerous thing if a member of parliament starts venting frustration in a manner, making these kind of absurd claims against the Chief Justice and Supreme Court. I mean, this would eventually head to a very serious constitutional crisis if all of this is allowed to continue in the public domain, surely, sir.
Well, I disagree with you. I think if the motive was intimidation, it would be worse. But if it's venting of frustration, that's okay. They're venting frustration. I mean, they're disappointed, and it doesn't behove. It doesn't behove, certainly, lawyers, for instance, to vent their frustration in that manner. But a layman might do that. It happens so often. A member of parliament should also not do it, and therefore, since he was a member of parliament, the party president has distanced himself from it and said his views are not our views. It's his personal view.
No, you're saying party president has distanced himself from Dubey's remarks, but somewhere isn't this part, I come back to it, of a concerted effort, you don't like the word intimidate, but to then bulldoze the judiciary. I'm not using the word intimidate, bulldoze the judiciary into falling in line on contentious cases like the Waqf Board case, for example.
Rajdeep, you are trying semantic jugglery with a lawyer. You are now replacing the word intimidation with bulldozing, which, to my mind, is roughly a synonym. So, okay, I still don't see that this is actually an attempt to bulldoze, because I don't believe that anybody, any reasonable man with a modicum of intelligence in this country, would believe that the judiciary, which has a lot of support in this country, and also which is a very powerful brethren in itself, right, can be intimidated.
But you agree, Mr. Jethmalani, that the kind of statements that a Nishikant Dubey has made are avoidable and hence surely should be censured. You agree with that or not?
Yes. That these and that Mr. Nadda's, the president's censure was justified, yes.
But some would say Mr. Nadda needed to do much more. You need to do maybe a show cause notice. You need to do much more than just simply say that, these are his private remarks.
Well, this is much more than a censure. It's a clear enunciation that this is not the party's view. What more can you do?
Mr. Jethmalani, the problem is all of this is coming against the backdrop of Vice President Dhankar also then going ahead and saying that the judiciary, the Supreme Court, is acting as a super parliament, saying that the Supreme Court is using the powers it has under Article 142 almost like a nuclear missile against democratic process. Is the Vice President here also not overstepping his position in the manner in which he is going ahead and targeting the judiciary?
Well, I mean, you can disagree with his choice of words, and I do disagree that 142 was being used as a nuclear missile. I mean, that may be a little too strong, a little too intemperate. But, I think what he was probably taking up cudgels for was the case in hand, mainly where, the court, a two-judge bench, had passed a judgment regarding, circumscribing and keeping a time limit in particular on disposal of bills by assent to bills by the governor and particularly the president. This is the vice president speaking, right? So he could be zealous about his jurisdiction, or at least, his jurisdiction in times where he may be the acting president. And certainly speaking for the president herself in this case, that maybe a time limit imposed, and that too by a two-judge bench when it ought to have been done by a five-judge bench, was not in the interest of propriety. That's one. And secondly, also I think that it may be a little bit of a little bit of pique that it was done in a matter in which one really did not need to go into the president's powers at all, because that case was finally disposed of by saying that the actions of the governor were wrong, and that therefore his decisions in respect of all 10 bills were wrong, and therefore the question of him forwarding bills for the consideration of the president after it had been a second time reaffirmed by the Assembly was totally misconceived.
But you know, Mr. Jethmalani, the fact is in all the cases where we are seeing the whiff of a judiciary-executive confrontation, for example, the case you cited, the governor of Tamil Nadu is not fulfilling his constitutional duties by not giving assent to bills passed by the legislature. In such cases, where governors are seen to virtually act as agents of the center against opposition-ruled states, do you agree that the Supreme Court is duty-bound to remind the governors of not acting in bad faith? If the judiciary doesn't act, then who will?
No, I agree, but perhaps, given the, this is an alternative view. I'm again not saying that the decision was unjustified or whatever, except for the fact that it should have been left to a larger bench, right? But I'm not saying it was totally unjustified. The judgment actually reads quite well, and you are right that it is necessary for bills to be passed expeditiously. I'm not differing even on that point of view. But perhaps if they had at the first instance, right, given the fact that there are clearly that the law-making function, right, belongs to the legislature, right, and the judges only apply the law. And they don't create it, right? Now, when you put a time limit, which is not put there in the Constitution, you are reading something which is not in the express words of the Constitution. It may make for an interpretation that makes the entire passing of bills procedure more efficacious, right? I concede that, but essentially the function belongs to the legislature, and perhaps they could have in the first instance, right, said that the legislature should take cognizance of this and pass appropriate time limits if the legislature wants, right, whether it's 3 months or 6 months. But for them for the judiciary to put a specific period, and there may be other considerations which may suggest that period is not appropriate. It is best left to the legislature to decide it.
But let me then ask you in conclusion, are you not worried as someone who's been, as you said, in the profession for decades now, that increasingly members of parliament, MLAs, and even worse, constitutional functionaries like the vice president believe it is open season to target the judiciary, because the sense is the judiciary is the one body that can control some form of executive overreach at the moment. And the executive doesn't want that to happen, and therefore they are targeting the judiciary in this manner.
No, I just think that for a long time, the present government, for instance, has conceded a lot of space. It has, from the Loya case, which was an exercise in total misconceived PIL, which the judiciary itself said, till to the Rafael case, to the Adani case, all of which have been rejected, right, by the Supreme Court itself. I think the government has shown extreme tolerance, and they have to contest all these cases, right?
Sir,
and all of them have been dismissed and found to be without any reason.
So it seems, Mr. Jethmalani, the government shows extreme tolerance when the judiciary supports a decision taken by the Modi government. And when the decision goes against the government, then there is an open season and the judiciary is criticized. It is accused even of inciting a civil war. Isn't this a classic example of intolerance being shown by the government?
But perhaps Rajdeep, you are extrapolating a little bit too much, because this is one MP, right? One MP who has made a couple of statements. That is Nishikant Dubey, right? And it has been made very clear that the party doesn't support him, and certainly the government doesn't. He doesn't represent the government. He's not a member of the government. He's a member of the legislature.
Okay.
Right?
But does the BJP, in your view, support the idea of a fully independent judiciary or not? Is the BJP in support of the idea of an independent judiciary?
I'm now going by example. Yes, it does, because the BJP has, by its conduct, repeatedly respected the decisions of the judiciary. It is members of the opposition who castigate the judiciary when they lose cases which they think they ought to win. I'll give you many examples. It is the opposition, right, which constantly, when they lose battles in court, carp and undermine the judiciary.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there, Mahesh Jethmalani. You're feisty as ever. You've given us what you believe is your response to this judiciary versus executive face-off. Appreciate you joining me. Let me now get the judiciary's angle here. Justice Sanjeev Banerjee is one of India's distinguished jurists, former Chief Justice of the High Courts of Madras and Meghalaya, joins us. Justice Banerjee, you might have heard Mahesh Jethmalani there making a defense in a way of his tribe of politicians, suggesting they are venting their frustration. They are not intimidating the judiciary. The Modi government believes in an independent judiciary. Your response?
Well, we've seen nothing overt to think otherwise. The government ought to and appears to believe in an independent judiciary. But there may be some loose cannons here and there, and one should not take everything that is said literally or attach too much seriousness to it. In public offices, judges are also open to criticism. Individuals are entitled to their opinions, and one should respect that for it as it is.
But I want an honest answer. Does this, what Nishikant Dubey said, according to you, amount to contempt or not? A direct attack on the Chief Justice, accusing him of inciting a civil war, and then suggesting that the Supreme Court is promoting religious wars across the country while the court is hearing sensitive cases. Is this not contempt?
Technically, it may be, but such scurrilous allegations are better left without being given any kind of dignity. One should not take up this matter and make an issue out of it, because that is exactly what probably the gentleman wants.
How do you're saying that Nishikant Dubey could well be a loose cannon, but what about when the Vice President of the country, who himself has been a lawyer, says Supreme Court judges have no accountability, that they are acting as a super parliament, that they are using Article 142 as a nuclear missile? This is the Vice President of the country. Should that not be a cause of concern?
It ought to be. To begin with, the office of the Vice President has to be respected. Secondly, and in all fairness, the matter as to the President giving assent or the time that ought to be taken by the President may not have been directly an issue in the matter pertaining to the Tamil Nadu governor withholding his consent or assent. That should have been left at that between the governor and the state, and not taken beyond to the President. Probably in due course, it will be taken to be an obiter rather than a binding kind of precedent. But of course, even an obiter of the Supreme Court is very important and significant. And the Vice President, as a lawyer, was venting an opinion, which he is entitled to.
But you see, the worry is that all these venting of opinions will eventually lead to some kind of a face-off sooner or later between the judiciary and executive. Isn't that a cause of worry and concern? I mean, if I'm sitting in the judge's chair, I'm always going to now look over my shoulder to see what is the executive or the Vice President going to say next.
I don't think any worthy judge does that or cares for what is said, as long as he does his job properly. Secondly, and more importantly, a slight friction between the judiciary and the executive or the legislative is good for democracy. It's always been. When President Roosevelt and the New Deal, ran into the Supreme Court ruling against it, he said he wanted to pack the US Supreme Court with yes-sayers and get rid of the naysayers. So it's all over the world. It's not, look at it as an isolated incident in India or in Indian politics or politicize it. But at the same time, I think that, some recent judgments or sayings by worthy judges have probably given an impression that the backbone that is necessary may not always be there. Some judgments of recent times have shown the same kind of character, let me say.
Yeah, but as we've seen with the two-judge bench verdict on governors, putting certain limits on their constitutional role and responsibilities, that seems to have at least given hope that the judiciary is out there to stop constitutional functionaries from acting in bad faith. And that should be respected by the executive instead of targeting the judiciary. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, but again, if the executive or the legislature feels otherwise, then they would bring about an appropriate law that might negate the judgment. And that they are perfectly within the rights to do it, and everyone is perfectly within his rights to kind of drum up support for such a situation. That does not mean that there's disrespect. Yes, some of the words could have been better chosen. The obvious disrespect for the office or the position should probably have been avoided. But that doesn't mean there's any attack or there is any kind of planned thing to dismantle the judiciary or to demolish it or to intimidate it, as you use with Mahesh Jindani. Judges don't. Judges don't get intimidated so easily.
I use the word also, Justice Banerjee, and you know this better than many, because all of this is coming against the backdrop also of the way in which there seems to be an unease in the executive and the judiciary over the transfer and appointment of judges. The collegium system coming under pressure. All of the, we had this instance a few weeks ago where cash was found at the door of a house of a high court judge. There seems to be a certain uneasiness, particularly when it comes to appointment of judges, their transfers. All of this is leading again, one fears, to some kind of a flashpoint sooner or later. Are you saying you're entirely sanguine that there won't be any such flashpoint?
The undercurrents have always been there, will be there, and they are there. Now, that is something which is the truth. But then one has to navigate it, and the judiciary must show the resilience that its position demands. Few attacks here or there, people expressing their opinion, should be ignored. If at the same time, if you look at the judgment by the two-judge bench, you see recommendations made by Supreme Court collegiums, recommendations remade, which become binding on the government, have not been acted upon. So therefore, probably in the light of the executive's conduct over the last few years, the judiciary felt it obligatory to set a time limit. Otherwise, there's no constitutional time limit expressly said. But once the constitution says that if this happens, the consent should follow or the appointment should follow, the appointment has to follow. It can't wait for months or years thereafter. So because of this kind of a reaction, because some of the recommendations by the collegium have not been followed, despite being re-recommended, the Supreme Court felt it necessary that now it's time to set some time limits.
Okay. I think you've raised several important points and you've given a much more nuanced opinion. It's not black and white, and that is often the case in many of these tricky constitutional issues involving authorities like the executive and the judiciary. Justice Sanjeev Banerjee, for expressing your opinion. I appreciate you joining me. The judiciary versus executive face-off is something we will keep tracking. My own view is that members of parliament must be very careful in their choice of words. Nishikant Dubey, unfortunately, is a serial offender in that case. Let me turn to another of our top stories. In a sensational and chilling case coming in from Karnataka, the former Director General of Police, Om Prakash, has been murdered, allegedly now by his own wife. The brutal crime took place at their Bengaluru residence while the retired top cop was having lunch. Here's a detailed report.
Former Karnataka DGP Om Prakash is stabbed to death inside his home in Bengaluru. The police on Monday arrested his wife Pallavi and their daughter Kruti for questioning. According to sources, the retired police officer was seated for lunch when Pallavi served him 2 types of fish. Moments later, a fight allegedly broke out. Wife Pallavi threw chili powder into his eyes before allegedly stabbing him multiple times in the neck and head. The DGP's body was found lying in a pool of blood. A plate was still lying near the table. 2 knives have been recovered from the scene, say sources. After the murder, both Pallavi and her daughter reportedly went upstairs. Later, Pallavi herself dialed the police to report the murder. When the police arrived, daughter Kruti allegedly created a ruckus and locked herself in a room. The officers had to break down the door to take her into custody. Pallavi, meanwhile, surrendered and allegedly confessed to the crime. The forensics team is examining fingerprints on the weapons and collecting more evidence to establish the sequence of events.
We have got the PM done. We have handed over the body to the son. We have taken to the HSR ground for the formalities. And please come, sir is there. Sir will give you all the details. Come, we are investigating it. We are investigating it.
ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ನೊಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಅವರು ಏನು ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಶ್ರೀನಿವಾಸ್. ಬಟ್ ನಾನಂತೂ ಟ್ರೀಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಲಕ್ಷಾಂತರ ರೂಪಾಯಿ ನಾನು ವ್ಯಯಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಬಟ್ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಅವರು ಒಂದು ಸಲ ಮಾತಾಡ್ದಂಗೆ ಫಾರ್ ಮೈಂಡ್ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಸಲ ಇರಲ್ಲ. ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆನೇ ಹೇಳೋದು ಸಾಹೇಬ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಕಾರಣ ಅದೇ ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಅವರು ಒಂಥರ ಈಗಿಂತ ಅಂತಲ್ಲ ಸುಮಾರು ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ಇದೇ ಥರ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಲೆಫ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದರೆ ನಾವೇನು ಉಸಿರಾಡ್ತೀವೋ ಆ ನರಕ್ಕೆ ಇದು ಚೂಪಾದ ಆಯುಧದಿಂದ ತಿಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನನಗೆ ಅದು ನೋಡಿ ಭಾಳ ಇದಾಯಿತು. ಆ ತಾಯಿ ಯಾಕೆ ಆ ರೀತಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು, ಬೀಭಿಸ್ತವಾಗಿ ಕೊಲೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
An FIR was filed based on a complaint by the former DGP's son, who alleged that the mother and daughter used to threaten his father. Sources say Pallavi has been battling schizophrenia for over 12 years. Pallavi had allegedly told family members that she feared her husband might kill her. Visagai Raj in Bengaluru, Bureau Report, India Today.
Let's turn to tonight's Get Real India story. And tonight's story is coming from Nashik in Maharashtra. The summer has barely begun, but water woes are intensifying in parts of parched Nashik. Several women are seen venturing into a deep well in search of water. Let's take a look at our Get Real India story tonight.
This video of a woman climbing down a well to fetch water has gone viral. The images from Borichibari village, which is in Nashik district, revealed the real extent of water scarcity in the region. All three wells in the village are almost dry. Draupada Mahanubhav, the woman in the video, tells India Today.
दिन में 1-2 बार उतरना पड़ता है, पानी नहीं है ना, इसलिए उतरना पड़ता है। किसी का दांत टूटा है, किसी का हाथ टूटा है, इसलिए डर लगता है। छोटे छोटे बच्चे हैं, इतना गंदा पानी पिएंगे तो मानव क्या करेगा, क्या कम दिखता है, इसलिए उतरना पड़ता है।
Borichibari is one of the 6 villages that fall under Kumbhale Gram Panchayat. Villagers walk up to 3 kilometers every day to the nearest well in Kumbhale for water.
जब से हम इस गांव में आए हैं उसके पहले से भी यही हाल थे और जब से हम इस गांव में आए हैं तब से यही हाल है। तो 2-1.5 किलोमीटर से लाते हैं, ये दिन में 2 दफे तो जाना पड़ता है। हमारी मांग इतनी सरकार से है कि हमको पानी चाहिए।
2-3 महीने के बाद नहीं है, कायम स्वरूपी पानी पीने के लिए हमारी सुविधा करना चाहिए। मैं पर्यंत पानीच नहीं रहा, इहरीत उतरायला लागत है।
The scarcity of water in Borichibari has led to some unforeseen issues.
यहाँ के युवा जब लड़की देखने जाते हैं तो वहाँ लड़की वाले बोलते हैं कि वहाँ पानी नहीं है, कैसे देंगे उसको, वो पानी ला सकती है इतने दूर से कैसे। अब 25-30 युवा होंगे, उनके मन में यही चर्चा गांव में चर्चा होती है, थोड़ा सा अपने गांव में पानी होता तो लड़की मिल जाती, ऐसा थोड़ा सा चलता है उनका।
Villagers are hoping the Jal Jeevan Mission scheme will solve their water problem.
जल जीवन का काम रुका है, वो ठेकेदार लोग हम उनको बार-बार फोन पे बोलते हैं, लेकिन वो भी बोलते हैं कि सरकार हमको पैसा से नहीं दे रहा है तो हम काम कैसे चालू करें। टैंकर वाले बोर से पानी लेके आते हैं, वो हमको खरीदना पड़ता है, 200 लीटर 60 रुपए देना पड़ता है।
वहाँ पे पिछले साल भी वेल एक्विजिशन किया था। अब लोगों का कहना है कि हमें यहाँ से वेल में नहीं होना पानी, हम जगह जगह पे डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करो। 10 महीने तो नल से पानी मिलता है और 2 महीने की भी समस्या, ये जल जीवन मिशन की योजना जो है वो पूरी हो जाने के बाद वही समस्या का हल हो जाए।
The Jal Jeevan Mission has a budget of around 7 crore rupees for Kumbhale Gram Panchayat. Under the scheme, a pipeline linking the area to a lake located 7 kilometers away is under construction. The villages are now banking on the success of the project to end their water woes. With Praveen Thakre, Bureau Report, India Today.
Some things don't seem to change. The water crisis is amongst that in rural India. We will continue to show those Get Real India stories that you won't find on prime time elsewhere. Tonight, I want to leave you, though, with a sad story. Just a day after his Easter address, the Vatican announced the death of Pope Francis on Easter Monday. Pope Francis was popularly known as the People's Pope, the Pope of the poor, who called on the church to work for the poor above all else. He was 88 and leaves behind a legacy of compassion that will serve the church rather well in the years ahead. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Good night, Shubhratri, Jai Hind, Namaskar.
Carissimi fratelli et sorelle.
Dear brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father.
The bells tolled at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican hours after the announcement of the death of Pope Francis. So did in Notre Dame Church. Faithfuls started to congregate to mourn the first Latin American Pope, who identified himself as the Pope of the poor.
It is a great disappointment, a great loss. A man who has innovated the church and a man who has left a great mark. And this, his absence, causes great pain.
Well, I don't live in Rome. I live in Milan, and I'm here for Easter. And I find it very significant that the Pope has died during Easter, or the Easter weekend. I'm from Argentina. The Pope is Argentinian, so it has quite a bit of significance for us.
It is a very sad news, a great loss for the church and for the whole world. A Pope who worked so hard for peace and for the good of all. Let us all pray for him.
He was the first Latin American pontiff who charmed the world with his humble style and concern for the poor. Pope Francis, in the 12 years of his service, also alienated conservatives with critics of capitalism and climate change. He was the Pope who made an unscheduled stop to pray at the wall separating Israel from the West Bank town of Bethlehem in a show of support for the Palestinian cause. Within weeks, on June 8, 2014, Pope Francis hosted Israeli and Palestinian presidents for peace prayers in the Vatican Gardens. A month later, he apologized in Bolivia for the sins and crimes of the Catholic Church against indigenous peoples during the colonial era conquest of the Americas. He is the Pope who prayed for dead migrants in the US-Mexico border in 2016 and called out the then presidential candidate Donald Trump as not a Christian for wanting to build a border wall. Pope Francis was the pontiff who never shied away from criticism or apologizing when proven wrong. He first accused the Chilean sex abuse victims of slander in his visit in January 2018. But within months, ordered Vatican investigation and did not hesitate to apologize and admit grave error and secured resignation of Chilean bishops. He raised his voice for the refugees and tried to clean the clergy of sexual abuse charges with punitive actions.
He's a beacon of humanity for everyone, and especially for Argentina. I hope we take on board this message and we come together as a people and stop fighting so much.
Condolences poured in from across the world as leaders of different faiths all coming together to mourn the man who was a living symbol of simplicity. Pope Francis has always struggled with pulmonary disease before succumbing to it at the age of 88.